Hello and welcome to the Inside Track, the podcast where we chat about all the things that give you the edge in the worlds of innovation, business design, tech, and culture. I'm Fuzlin Esau, and today we're joined by Toby Rogers, Head of Product at Hedgehog Lab, as well as Becca Anderton, Head of Engineering at Hedgehog Lab. And over the next few weeks, they'll be joining me as we round up what you as an innovator need to know now. But before we jump in, Toby and Becca are pretty cool people. So I'd love for them to share a little bit about themselves. Becca, let's kick off with you.
Yeah, of course. So I'm head of engineering at Hedgehog Lab. I have been at the lab for just over 9 years now, so I'm very much part of the furniture. My background is in JavaScript development, so I joined as a front-end engineer way back when, and then I've kind of worked up through engineering management and then into the position that I'm in now, which I've been doing for sort of five or 6 years. And I love it. I love everything about it, really.
Love it. What's it? Toby.
Toby, I'm head of product at Hedgehog Lab and have been for the last 3 or so years. Prior to that, I was part of the founding team of a couple of ed tech startups and had a pretty squiggly career into tech. I've been doing product management stuff for about 10 to 12 years, but prior to that, I was a music journalist and ended up getting into tech as a way to kind of pay the rent, because you can't pay that with free CDs and give profit. But I've absolutely loved it and have really enjoyed kind of time spent building products and solving like complicated problems and doing cool digital stuff.
Love it. Cool. So we'll jump straight into kind of what's been going on over the last week, and we'll jump into our topics. The first one, unsurprisingly, is about zero UI. So with the rise of zero UI products, we're starting to increasingly experience products through third parties like chatbots. It's kind of fundamentally changing how we think about user experience and how we deliver value to the customer that now is very rarely interacting with the product directly. Are we still building interfaces, or are we designing desired behaviors now? Or are we sort of looking for outcomes? And do our teams even know how to do that yet?
Yeah, no, I think it's a really important topic. I think there's probably an inherent risk that you kind of move that way a little bit too soon. Because I think, there are still a lot of people that will be using interfaces regularly. But I do think it's important. It's almost like the accessibility conversation where you kind of have to keep that in your mind now. You've got to kind of step away from designing what the users are going to see into designing actually what happens when they ask. But I think that we're still in that sort of middle ground of trying to balance both.
I think this is super interesting from how we think about building products perspective. I think the idea that we're like leaping straight to no UI products is kind of hype at the minute.
Yeah.
But I think for a whole generation of product people have kind of grown into their careers building digital experiences that are apps and that are kind of user journeys that go through app flows. Apple did there's an app for that marketing campaign in something like 2009. So that's like 17 years ago. So if you've worked in tech for less than 17 years, you've only had kind of apps as part of that experience. And as product people, we're kind of taught that we should be thinking about user outcomes and we should be thinking about the impact that we make and we should be thinking about adding value. But we still kind of think about that in terms of screens and buttons and UI and flows through applications, both web apps and mobile. And I think what needs to happen is we need to shift our way of thinking into a more holistic way of approaching how we deliver outcomes for our customers, whether that's in the app that they're using on their phone, or whether that's through an integration with ChatGPT, or whether that's through voice, like Alexa or something like that, is that improves with conversational AI. So I think there's a mindset shift that needs to happen for a lot of product people to kind of grasp those changes.
all of our questions this week are really around that idea of AI shifting into the conduit that through which the customer experiences everything, and that does bring us to our next topic, which is that more and more AI agents are becoming the users of the products. So we're accessing products via third-party tools. A lot of the time, the user is the agent, and we're seeing this, with the rise of GEO and all of those sort of things. People are talking about there may not be even need for websites anymore. So does this mean that we're now shifting our thinking about user journeys from the perspective of the customer to how will an agent use this? And when AI starts making these sort of buying decisions, what actually starts to happen to things like brand and loyalty? Or do they kind of get optimized out in favor of like generic product that solves your problem?
I think it's an important consideration when we're building and designing products now that one of the users is going to be an AI agent. And when we're designing user experiences and we're designing product flows, we need to be thinking about, will this work for an agent that's using it as well as the actual customer? And we need to be kind of designing our user experience testing processes to cover both things, because what will happen is we move towards people using more kind of AI tools as the way to interact with different products. The ones that don't cater for agents are going to be the ones that don't get used and get left behind. So if you're trying to chase product market fit for something that you're building, you're going to have kind of embrace that. And I think when we're talking about brand, though, brand becomes even more important because brand kind of signifies trust. And I think it was an interesting experiment that Walmart had done recently where they had tested kind of purchasing within ChatGPT. So they tested, would people make purchases directly through ChatGPT with Walmart, or would they make purchases through ChatGPT's recommendations that then brought Walmart into the conversation? And actually the conversion was much better when it brought Walmart into the conversation because kind of the brand trust was there. And I think as kind of design and user flow, that isn't a differentiator anymore because it's all starts to exist within a chat interface. The brands that you trust are going to be the ones that stand out.
I kind of completely agree with Toby, to be honest. I think, if you don't optimize what you're building for an agent use, it's just going to be invisible in the long run, but there is still a balance to be found. There's always going to be people that do still use these platforms directly. It's never going to be, probably not in our lifetime, ever going to be 100% agent based. So I think building for agents would be the wrong approach, but rather you would want to build the interfaces that an agent can use just as well as a human being. But obviously you do need to take into consideration what an agent looks for. So we might have to start thinking about the way that we structure APIs and the way that we structure data and the way that we execute actions compared to how we normally do it, just to ensure that we are in a position where these agents can come on and use the sites effectively and that you don't get left behind.
Is it, I think, sort of the expected industries to use this are things like e-commerce and travel and those sort of things. Are there any sort of sectors that are outliers in terms of looking at this? And I'm thinking of things like where people have now become more comfortable having GPTs give them health advice and financial advice, and it does seem like it's one of those things that is a bit unsettling. Or should there be industries that maybe regulations have to catch up first before they start pursuing this type of integrations?
I think so, 100%. I think the sectors that you've just flagged are the ones that I had, like, you've hit the nail on the head. So the finance, the health, all of those sectors, there's so much risk in what AI can tell you that I think there needs to be some pretty strong regulations in there to make sure that users aren't being given misinformation. They're not going to make questionable investments off the back of an AI recommendation and things like that. So I think there's a lot of work still to do generally around AI, not just specifically for agent-based platforms, but in AI in general, to make sure that we are prepared and we do have those protocols in place to make sure people are safe and that sort of thing.
I think that's super interesting as well, in that I think I was probably quite surprised by how willing people seem to be to put a load of really private and personal stuff into an AI chatbot. Whereas all the early demos were like, I'm going to let this robot buy some airline tickets for me. But who's actually doing that? No one's actually doing that and getting agents to buy airline tickets for them, but having like really personal coaching conversations with something that they don't quite understand around like the privacy and stuff like that. So I think there's definitely a kind of regulatory thing that needs to catch up, and we don't have to move at the pace of the tech. The tech really ought to move at the pace that we're comfortable with, and I think there's some stuff that needs reeling in a little bit around some of that.
These are all topics that are kind of interlinked and really make sense as a whole in terms of where the industry is moving. But this one is really about sort of the difference between public and private knowledge. And what we're seeing is that what used to be really public knowledge is now almost being gatekept by LLMs. We used to ask questions in these sort of pretty public ways on Reddit, Quora, those sort of things. And now we do them, to ChatGPT or to Claude, more to Claude now, obviously. And it's not making much of a difference on an individual basis, the way I engage with the internet, but it has a potentially huge consequence on what we have as collective data. So we're gaining all of this sort of convenience. We're able to have this chat with a chatbot, but we're losing sort of the collective knowledge where stuff just exists freely on the internet. So instead of me accessing Reddit for free and accessing that knowledge there for free, I now pay a monthly fee to access Reddit through OpenAI. And really the question is, if the next competitive advantage in AI isn't just the model, but the data you can access, are we or should we be building products on open foundations or quietly locking ourselves, or are we quietly locking ourselves into someone else's ecosystem? And is there anything that we can do to kind of counter this right now?
I think there's a lot of risk around the way we're approaching AI and knowledge at the moment that probably has some pretty big and lasting implications. I'm old enough to have been like at kind of Web 1.0, like Google launched about 6 months or a year before I went to university. So went through that period of suddenly having all of the world's knowledge at my fingertips if I wanted to wait for 20 minutes for a modem to connect to the internet. And that kind of public availability of knowledge has been really, really important for me personally, but I think also industry wise as well. And while there's a lot of ease in asking a LLM to answer a question instead of going and searching for it on the internet, the consequence is that that question that you're asking and the answer that you're getting back is being used to train the model, and it's not being made public to everyone else unless they're signing up for the same model and getting that back as part of the kind of answer that the training data is generating for them. And the consequence of that is definitely we're kind of beginning to lock ourselves in to third parties who are owning knowledge for us. And it's worth remembering at the minute that all of the LLMs that we're using are being massively subsidized. So we're paying like a $20 or £20 fee to subscribe to Claude or subscribe to ChatGPT, but the cost to serve is massively more than that. So there's a point where suddenly we'll have to feel the implication of that and begin to pay for knowledge that was once public. And I think that has a massive knock-on effect on new people coming into tech and kind of the next generation of people who are working in software and digital products, in that they will risk finding themselves having to be tied into a third party to learn about stuff that was previously public.
And I think one of the things, I think it was Sam Altman who said, it was talking about sort of knowledge via sort of a credit system. So you sort of literally are paying to play. You put in, I want 50 knowledge credits, please. And that sort of dystopian outlook is very scary, especially when we consider where we've been over the last few years, which is having access to every piece of knowledge.
So I'm self-taught as a developer, so I don't have a computer science degree or anything like that. So a lot of my learning in the early days was very much done on the likes of Stack Overflow and searching and trying to figure out how to do stuff. And that was genuinely a really important resource, not just for me, but like for engineers everywhere. Like it's always been the go-to, like just check on Stack Overflow. And it's a real risk because even I do it now. I won't go on Stack Overflow anymore. I just go to Claude and just sort of say, can you just walk me through how to do this and explain why this works and what the situation is? But then you're not getting that sharing anymore. That's completely lost. And so, like Toby said, we're facing a dilemma where people that are coming into the industry are just not going to have that access to the shared knowledge that the people that have been in the industry for a long time have. And I think that's really sad, actually. And I think, we're facing a very real risk of a bit of a crisis around junior engineers anyway. It's only going to amplify that. And I think countering it is really hard because a lot of these big AI companies, they've kind of got a monopoly right now. Like there's not much to challenge them with other than kind of taking an individual stance on it and being aware of what's going on and what you're doing. And yes, it is fine to use these platforms, but could you maybe write a blog about what you've learned and share your knowledge another way? Or, could you, I don't know, find tools that do encourage that transparency or share their sources so that you know where you've got that from? Because ChatGPT is trained on Stack Overflow. Like originally, that's where it gets its knowledge from. So what's the harm in ChatGPT saying, oh, actually, I did get this, I'm citing this from Stack Overflow, so you can actually go and read into it and see what these other people have learned. And I think tools that could do that would be really valuable in this industry. I don't think that's necessarily going to happen because I think this paywall type approach is probably what they're going for, if we're being really frank about it. But I do think it's really sad that we're at risk of losing all of this knowledge and all of this collective learning.
And also just like the ability to go down like rabbit holes, right? Like I think you start on one end of a Reddit forum and you kind of end up all the way in a different thing, and you sort of that was completely different, but now it's sort of kicked off something else to think about. And I think for me, when you're engaging with a GPT, it's giving you back what you put in.
Mm-hmm.
And I find that is the thing that's missing.
Yeah.
When it comes to how we access knowledge and information now, because it used to be such a, you literally would be learning as you go deeper and deeper down a Wikipedia.
Exactly. You're learning on the journey, don't you? Whereas ChatGPT just gives you the answer and then you don't actually understand what's underneath the answer. You just have the answer. Whereas when you do the research and you follow the Reddit forums or Stack Overflow, you learn extra bits, but B, you develop that foundational knowledge of what it is you're trying to learn about.
I think it impacts on community as well in terms of, like Becca, I completely self-taught from a tech perspective. When I became a product manager, I was the first product manager at the company that I was working with. And they'd never had a product manager before. I essentially took over a product from the CEO and had to figure out what product management was all about. And I did that by kind of hassling and talking to who I thought were kind of industry leaders in product on Twitter when Twitter was good before Elon Musk bought it. And that kind of community forum and that online community approach to learning is being eroded as we're moving to our own kind of personal approach with what feels like a real person or a real thing talking back to us in an LLM. And I think a lot of the ways that we've kind of learned and engaged with each other is being impacted by the way that we're kind of learning and engaging through LLMs now.
So can we save it? Can we go backwards? I mean, okay. Or can we go in a different direction? What do you guys think?
I don't think we can go backwards. I think Pandora's box is very much open now. I think there probably is space to save it. I think it's going to rely on people creating counter products to the big LLMs. That's what we need, that do focus on the knowledge sharing in the community and the transparency. And I think it's kind of a mindfulness as an individual to think about how you are accessing that information and what you're doing with it. And I think that's important in AI in general. I think people probably do need to be a little bit more mindful about how they're using it. But I think in this scenario, it's particularly important because the more that we feed into it and give the power to these companies, the more this is going to snowball. So I think it probably relies on a few outliers coming out of the woodwork and challenging it, but also individuals kind of really reframing how they approach it and how they use it.
Okay.
Is it Andy Grove, who was CEO for Intel in the 80s and 90s or whatever, who said you can't stop tech in terms of the pace of tech. You've got to move with it. But I think you don't have to move at its pace, and you have to be in a position to kind of challenge and make sure that tech is doing the right things for you individually, as an organization, as a population. I think a good kind of reference point is the Industrial Revolution, which is what all talking about, kind of the AI revolution having a similar impact. But the Industrial Revolution could have moved at a faster pace, but a lot of people were going, whoa, hang on, what about this? You can't work 7 days in a week in a factory. You've got to have a day off. We've got to do all of these other things. We've got to put these guardrails in place. And that sort of thing isn't really happening with AI at the minute, but will need to enable us to make sure we don't have the impacts that we've just kind of talked about.
I think that there's definitely that need for the sort of governance and regulations to catch up just a little bit in terms of where we're at. And I think we're sort of all three of these questions really sort of present an interesting version of how we're now engaging with products and engaging with sort of digital experiences. And it's all sort of through a proxy, which is so interesting because we have, for the last 25 years, taken away more and more of the sort of barriers. And now we've sort of gone, okay, here's one big one for you. So I think there's going to be a lot of interesting things over the next few months, few weeks. Honestly, things change on a daily. What do you kind of guys see as sort of like the big thing? Like, what do you think is the big thing that's coming in the pipeline that we need to keep an eye out over the next 3 months, trend-wise, emerging tech-wise? Something that we should. Is it governance? Is that going to be the big question? Is it Sam Altman's credit system? Is what is the sort of the thing that we should be looking out for?
I'd like to think it would be governance, but I'm not convinced that will happen in the next 3 months. I'm probably slightly cynical in that I think governance will be given more of a priority when something bad happens, and then the outcome of that will be, oh, maybe we need to take this a little bit more seriously and think about it. But it changes so rapidly all the time. So there's a bit of a joke in front-end engineering that you can't keep up because there's a new JavaScript framework out every single day, just about. And it's very much the same thing. It feels like there's some sort of new agentic engineering process that you can follow, or new LLM or something new out just about every day. And I think it's just the rate at which it evolves is just going to be rapid, though it's going to be really hard to keep up with everything that's going on over the next 3 months, I think.
I think the big thing for me that I'm thinking about being mindful of at the minute is losing our ability to think because of the pace of AI, and because of the way that it is becoming extremely easy to create content and get LLMs to do our thinking for us in a way that presents back in a really what feels like a considered and well-written way. That the kind of latest models for Claude and ChatGPT are like miles ahead from where we started a couple of years ago in terms of the quality of content. But the quality of content doesn't represent the depth of thought that should be behind it. And the question I keep coming back to at the minute is, if you get an LLM to write an email for you, or write a strategy document for you, or write all your user stories for you, or whatever, did you really think those things, or did you just kind of abdicate your thinking to a machine? And what is the impact of that when you're actually rolling stuff out into production and you're actually building things based on a strategy that might be built on sand? And I think we'll start to see the impact over the next few months of companies that are doing that and and that's where the kind of governance piece will start to come in, because you'll see the backlash of building stuff that was irrelevant because nobody had done the thinking to kind of underpin it and make sure they were doing the right things.
I mean, that's a great place to end it off with. People should think more. So thank you, Becca. Thank you, Toby, for joining me. If you'd like access to our sessions, our briefings, our product builders, the network, or want to make change happen, get in touch via any of our channels, and we will see you all next week.